5. A good Geben Shtir to everyone. This episode we will dedicate for the Refuah Shlema, Yeshua the Fall Halevi ben Yecheved, a complete and speedy and immediate Refuah. Being that we have just entered the month of Cheshvan, the second month of the year. Cheshvan is the month that comes right after Tishrei. So essentially, the V'Yakov Hol Chadarka we spoke about last week, which was the Hachroza, the announcement that was always made in Chabad and Lubavitch, made Motzei Simchas Torah, and we spoke about the different levels, that it's essentially the journey that begins into the routine, into the regular routine of the year, following the injection and the gathering of resources and powerful treasures and resources, Esher, of the month Chedesh Hashvi, which is Muzba Bakel, which is satiated with all, and we essentially are empowered, and now we enter the new month of Cheshvan, and this begins the year. So in terms of Chassidus Applied, it's pretty obvious what the message and lesson is, that we now is the real test. Like in any situation, inspiration is one part of it. Empowerment, recharging your batteries, gathering strength and resources. But then the real test is how they are utilized and how they play themselves out. So in the beginning of Cheshvan, this is when it begins to play that itself out in that fashion. And now is the opportunity for us to take the things we've learned, the things we wanted to learn, and begin implementing on them on a daily basis and integrating them into our daily routines. And actually turning those routines into something which is beyond routine. Because as we've discussed many times, one of the great challenges in life is boredom, is monotony, routines, patterns, where we sometimes get trapped in the rut, in a groove where we are continuously like a broken record going through the same motions again and again. And it creates a despondency, it takes a type of quiet desperation. We're back to the square one, back to doing the same thing again and again and again. The point of life is to the way to the antidote to that is to infuse and to inject in our lives excitement, a type of passion, a type of zeal, a type of vitality, which is the whole purpose of Tishrei, the vitality that Rosh Hashanah, renewal, Yom Kippur, sanctity and joy, three key fundamental principles in a person's life, that should infuse each one of our days. So our routines may be the routine. You still wake up in the morning, you go through your regimens, but if it's infused with a new energy each day, you could jump out of bed with an excitement, that is the key. Even Abeichin, the key litmus test that Tishrei has really done its job, because as we unpack the resources we gathered, it actually is visible and discernible in our new approach to life. And that is essentially an understanding from the moment that you're born, but from the moment you awake every day, no matter what the routine, no matter what you're doing in life, you are infused with a mission that you and only you can accomplish, which is essentially what we learn from Rosh Hashanah, the collective birthday of the human race, and the mini Rosh Hashanah in each day, the Moida Ani. When we wake up, as soon as you awake, even before anything else, you acknowledge the soul that was returned to you and the contract that was renewed with you for another day to fulfill the purpose of your soul's mission in this world. What can be more exciting than that? So the challenge is, how do we define that mission? And it's definitely not defined by survival and by expectations and by the things we do. In other words, our mission is supposed to define our actions, not our actions are supposed to define our mission. And that is the challenge as we enter the month of Cheshvan. As we go through the month of Cheshvan, one of the milestones, another milestone is Zayin Cheshvan, which will be the end of this week. The 7th of Cheshvan is the day, we don't say, when in Eretz Yisrael they begin saying Mered HaGeshem, and the reason is because when the Eden would be El L'Regel, which means when they made their annual pilgrimage, 3 times a year, but when they went for Sukkot, and they made the annual pilgrimage, so the Jews that returned back to their homeland, especially after the first Beis Hamikdash, the second Beis Hamikdash, so many of them went back to Babylon, because that's where they lived. So the Chazal estimated that by the 7th of Cheshvan, everyone returned back home, even those that lived on the other side of Nahar Pros, the Euphrates, which is today modern day Iraq, which was then Babylon. And thus, we don't want to say Merit HaGeshem, because the blessing for rain, you don't want to disturb in any way, impede the journey due to rains that would be falling due to the prayers. And the Rebbe points out the unbelievable lesson in Ahavas Yisrael, that even though rain is a tremendous blessing, especially in that region, and is dependent on sustenance of the people. That's why we pray for Geshem and Shmini Atzeres, and that's when we begin the requests for Geshem. Nevertheless, we don't start praying for Geshem, for rain, because there may be one Jew who will be uncomfortable in a journey due to the fact that it's rain that is being requested, and God granting that request. So we wait till the last person goes home. That's how much we forego our own benefits and blessings, and how sensitive we are to even that basic need, just the discomfort in a journey. And Zayin Cheshvan represents that. So though today we don't have the Beis Hamikdash, but the lesson remains eternal, and it's a lesson that tells us that as we return back, each of us, to our respective spaces, our respective places in the world, after the month of Tishrei, and this can mean returning both physically and spiritually, meaning after being enriched by this holiday season, we return each to our space, to our regular lives, that we're sensitive to the fact that you have to get back in a comfortable way, and you settle in, and then we can ask for that great blessing of Geshem, which is both physical rain and also spiritual blessings. But we're always careful to make sure that every person is accounted for and every person is protected, and that our blessings, even though our prayers, even though they bring down blessings, should not in any way impede or hurt any other person. A basic lesson in sensitivity and in human sensitivity and in human empathy for each other, and Ahavas Yisrael, the love for another. And then we go right into Shabbos Pasha Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha, of course, the name itself indicates. Lech Lecha, of course, is referring to the journey of Avram Avinu, the first Jew, the first journey, and it's like, in a sense, the first mitzvah. Lech Lecha ma'atzecha meladetcha mebeis avicha, God telling Avram Avinu. And what more appropriate message is Lech Lecha as we go on our journey from the spiritual month of Tishrei. As I said, it's not just a month in time; it's also a conceptual journey, and we go into our lives. One of the lessons from Lech Lecha is a tremendous lesson in growth. It's a tremendous psychological application of Lech Lecha when Hashem says to Avram Avinu, He's telling him to leave. Lech Lecha, go. You leave your atzecha, your land, malatcha, your place of birth, and beis avicha, the home of your parents. So the question is, why 3 times repeating the location where he's at? It's true, some people's land and their birthplace and the home of their parents is in different places, but here it happened to be in one same place where Avram Avinu lived. This was in basically modern-day southeastern Iraq, in Ur Kasdim, and tells him to go al eretz asher ereka, to the land that I will show you. So when it comes to destination, it's a vague, the land I will show you. When you give someone directions, the opposite is true. You don't have to tell someone where to leave from. They know where they are. This is where they are. You have to tell them in detail where they should go. What country? Is it north, south, east, west? What city in that country? What state? What street in that city, etc. And here the opposite. 3 times repeating the idea that where you're leaving from, your land, your home place, your birthplace, and the home of your parents, and only a vague, the land I will go, that I will show you. So the Rebbe, based on the Alter Rebbe and Tereir and other places in Chassidus, explains, and Samach Vov, Lech Lecha, explains, because the key element here is, this isn't just a physical journey, this is a statement and a mitzvah that each of us is commanded by God in our lives, that as we grow, and we want to grow, this is the secret to growth. To leave your 3 levels of subjectivity that define and can trap and define who you are. If you want to discover your real self, al eretz asher ereka, which means not just the land I will show you, the land where I will show you, who you really are. You need to get out of the shadow of the influences of your life. And what are the 3 main influences? The 3 levels of subjectivity. 1 is your own natural self-love and bias and prejudices. Number 2 is the attitudes of our parents. And number 3 are social influences. And there you have Artzecha, Meladetcha, Mebeis Avicha. Artzecha is the culture that and society, the social pressures that define us. Malatacha is your birth, meaning your inherent self-love and your inherent biases. And Beis Avicha is the home of your parents, the influences of your parents, for good or for bad. So often a person can ask, who am I really? Maybe all I am is an extension of my environment, or extension of my own prejudices, or an extension of my parental influences. Comes Lech Lecha and says, you want to discover yourself, the key is not the destination. The key is to free yourself as much as possible from the trappings of your subjectivity. Now, no one can free themselves completely, but at least know that that's what you need to be able to leave behind. Now, this doesn't mean, even if a person grew up in the best and healthiest home, there's a time where they need to leave their homes, both physically and figuratively, in the sense they need to be able to go out on their own and make it on their own. That's the greatest blessing that parents can have, is when they see their children grow into adults and build their own homes and families. So Lech Lecha is essentially saying that it's very comfortable to stay in your comfort zone. But comfort zones don't create growth. And Tishrei is a certain sense of comfort zone. Not a negative one, a positive comfort zone, because you're basking in the glow of tremendous spiritual activities. But however, the real test is that now you have to leave the womb, so to speak, and go into the world and demonstrate what you're able to accomplish. Like Gitis HaNeshama Beguf, as Chassidus explains, why does the soul leave the comfort of its palace, of its king? Because the prince has to come into a world that's a hostile world, a dark world. Lech Lecha, which is halicha mamayl lamata, going from the soul's descent to a world which is a very dark world. And there demonstrate and prove that you can accomplish through your own effort, because you don't have the giluyim, the revelations and the strings that are given from above. Through your own effort, you can accomplish tremendous things. You read the Tzedek Aliyah, and this descent brings them far greater ascent that's much higher than the way the neshama, the soul, was before it came down. And this is also true, not just when we're born, the first time when a soul descends into this world, but every year as we go from Tishrei into Cheshvan, and every day, frankly, because every day we're born anew, with Chadoshim Livkarim, every morning, where we are re-energized, the soul returns, Neshama Shenasata Bi, that we say in Meida'ani, Shechzata Bi Nishmasi, the soul is returned. So it's a mini birth each morning. And that birth is the descent into a world that has its challenges, but we're armed with an arsenal, with a rich arsenal that allows us to take on any challenge and take on any difficulty without the fears involved. Just want to share, I may have shared this in the past. I heard from Rabbi Zalman Posen once with Fabring in a sukkah, and he said to me that, I think it's in Tavshin Zayin, it would be 1947, so he was a Bachar student in 770. Friedrich Rebbe called him in and sent him on a shlichus. He was, and not yet a permanent one, but I think it was Chicago, he may have told me. And to go there, and obviously do what he can to spread Yiddishkeit, to talk to Eden, to me'ir them, inspire them, so on. Reb Zalman showed a certain hesitation. The Friedrich Rebbe sensed that he was reticent and hesitant to go. So he realized that he's afraid. So the Friedrich Rebbe, and the Friedrich Rebbe, remember this was after, it was difficult for Friedrich Rebbe to speak so clearly. So there was always a secretary there that helped translate, sometimes the Rebbe, our Rebbe. And the Friedrich Rebbe used his hands, which helped also emphasize what he wants to say. So Reb Zalman told me the following. Friedrich Rebbe said to him, as an neshama daf arob kum lamata, when a soul has to come down below, it doesn't want to go. It's Vilnish gain. The neshama Vilnish gain doesn't want to go. It's resistant. Why? Val eben is lichtikum varim, because in heaven, where the soul resides, it's lichtik, it's bright and warm. Und unten is kalt and finster, and below is dark and cold, or cold and dark. So what do they do? The neshama doesn't want to go. Al korcha chatachai, it's compelled to go. They tell the neshama that you have to, and the Friedrich Rebbe took his finger, the Reb Zalman said, and he pointed like this, and they tell the neshama, you have to go down, where it's bright and warm, to go down. Friedrich Rebbe's finger was trembling slightly as it went down, 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 to there where it's cold and dark, and dorten darf machen lichtig warm. And there, in the dark and cold, desolate world, to turn that into a warm and bright, spiritual and godly and divine environment. So, of course, he understood the lesson quite well. He said that sometimes, often, or whenever he had difficulties, sometimes you feel like you're in pits, so to speak. You feel like, you feel like things aren't going so well. He would always close his eyes and envision the finger of the Frierdiker Rebbe, giving him the keach to go down and make there bright and warm. This is essentially the mission of Lech Lecha, and especially, as I said, coming from Tishrei, that is our mission. And when you feel that confidence and power, and you know that is the kavanah, so when you're faced with a difficulty, and who doesn't have difficulties? Well, the first thing you know is that's exactly why you were sent there. Not because it's easy, but because you have the power to overcome the difficulty and see it as a challenge and a catalyst and a springboard for greater growth. This is a general lesson to each one of us. Whatever challenges we face, whatever questions come into Chassidus Applied, which reflect the spectrum of people's challenges, this is a general lesson to all of us that's particularly relevant in this time of the year. Truth is, it's relevant all year round, but especially when this transition from Tishrei to Cheshvan that we just discussed. So that as an opening is an opening to the period in which we are in, as our custom is to always begin with the time, Leben mit der Zeit, the Pasha and the date, Zayin Cheshvan, in the spirit of what it says in Chassidus and the Rebbe's, particularly in the Rebbe's Siches, and the Rebbe essentially made Zayin Cheshvan come alive. You don't really find, I haven't seen in Chassidus from the previous Rebbeim, Zayin Cheshvan may be mentioned, but definitely not elaborated on, as the Rebbe turned it into a lesson of our own life journey and the Ahavas Yisrael that I mentioned before. So let's begin with a few questions, one actually connected to the Parsha that we're coming from, Bereshis and Noach, and we'll move along, and here's a good opportunity to welcome all the listeners, especially if you're a new listener. Let me give you some information of where you can submit your questions, meaningfullife.com/mylife. There's an anonymous forum where you can ask anything you wish. Every question will be addressed. If not this week, coming weeks, there are many questions, so we have some backup. So it takes time to be able to address them all, but be patient. And the nether, we will address every question that comes in. And do not hesitate in asking anything. You can also address comments, sources, anything that you hear addressed here that you have any thoughts about, whether you agree or disagree, or additional sources is always welcome. And I try to read as many as I can on this program. And there you'll find as well, at meaningfullife.com/mylife, many other resources, all the archives, now 184 episodes that we've already done, plus the essays, and plus other resources that you can take advantage of in applying Chassidus to our lives, and hence MyLife, Chassidus Applied. So the question, here's the question: what can we learn from Hashem's change in perspective? I'm reading exactly as it was written to me, even though I find this a little amusing. Chief Mashpia and conveyor of the esoteric wisdom to the virtual world, Rabbi Jacobson. I have a question about Hashem's change in perspective from Parashat Bereshis to Parashat Noach. In the end of Parashat Bereshis, Torah teaches us God saw that man's wickedness on earth was increasing, and every thought which came from his heart throughout the day was evil. We are then told, God said, I will wash away man whom I created from upon the face of the earth. Man as well as cattle, creeping things, and birds of the skies. For I have reckoned what to do about the fact that I made them. Which of course is the great flood that comes in Parshas Noach. In Parshas Noach, Torah teaches us, I will no longer curse the earth because of man, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his first stirrings in the womb. I will never again kill all living things as I have done. So in the first place, as a result of man's wickedness and the fact that every thought which came from his heart throughout the day was evil, he decides to destroy mankind. Yet in the second instance, we learn that despite the fact that the imagination of man's heart is evil from his first stirrings in the womb, he will no longer curse the earth because of man, and in fact makes a covenant with man. What can we learn from the different reactions Hashem has to man's evil? An excellent question. To answer it with a question, the truth is, the question should have been asked at the end of Parashat Bereshis. Nechamtim ki asisim. There we learn that first God creates the world and puts Adam Achav into Gan Eden. Then the Chetz Eitz Hadas. And then the generations begin to get more corrupt and more corrupt. And what does Hashem say at the end of the Parsha? I regret that I created them. So there, of course, the obvious question is, what's going on? What is this change of mind? First he created them, then he regrets he created them, then he destroys them, and then, as you write in your excellent question, He regrets that he will no longer destroy them afterwards. So what is this, some type of back and forth? It sounds very strange for anybody, especially God. Because the additional bigger question is, did God not anticipate? He created man. He put a serpent in the Garden of Eden. He gives us all a Yetzer Hara. And what is he expecting? That we're going to be perfect? It's part of the plan is that we should be challenged, and many times we will fall. So what's this regrets? You could say he created the world with these challenges, and then he deals with the challenges as they come. If people fall, there are consequences. But this change of mind sounds strange. So Rashi explains at the end of Bereshis, he gives the example where a person, when he's celebrating his children's wedding, he's celebrating. And God forbid, when he's mourning and grieving over a death, he grieves. It's not a contradiction. This is one side of the heart, and this is the other side of the heart. And different situations. That when human beings behave the proper way, God celebrates. When they behave the other way, God, so it's not a regret, it's just a different type of so-called attitude to when he sees something that's negative. And human beings, human beings definitely have this, we see it. And Hashem, obviously, is beyond moods and beyond changes, but Kavyachol bound himself to existence in the same way. Just like things can give him nachas, things can also cause him grief. Now, of course, this is not anthropomorphic, not in any physical way, God forbid, but God bound himself to the destiny of existence. In Kabbalah and Chassidus discusses at length that there's, of course, a level that is beyond nechama. There's a kilei odom who, so he's not capable of being consoled or regrets and so on. But that's a level that's beyond existence. The way the divine manifests in existence, you can say he bound himself to the conditions of the world, and a corrupt world will cause God grief, in a sense, and cause consequences, and a beautiful world will be the opposite. But how do you understand these changes and why the Torah speaks about it in a very direct way? So let's turn it into a discussion a little more about what defines man. Because we definitely see both sides. On one hand, the first description of the human being is, the first description, in the sixth day. What happened on Rosh Hashanah? Hashem says, let us create the human being, b'tzalmeinu kidmusenu, in our image and our likeness. Tselem Elokim. So the human being is created in the divine image. More than any creature on earth. All creatures are God's creatures. So they all reflect God's wisdom and God's handiwork, and the artist is reflected in the art. But nothing is defined as being created in the divine image. Later there's the expression, He's like one of us. That will be seen, he's like similar to the divine. The Rambam says, the Alter Rebbe brings in the Likutei Torah, that refers to free will. That only the human being has free will. But Tselem Elokim, however you explain it, is a very powerful statement. Later words that we find in later Sfarim, especially in Chassidus, Chelek Elokam Emal Mamish. Vayipach ba'apov nishmas chaim, mitei chiyusei nofach, as the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 2 in Tanya. That it's not just another creation. It's mitei chiyusei, from the inner dimensions of the divine. He imbued within us, infused within us, the breath of a soul. Yipach ba'apov nishmas chaim. In this clump of earth that created the human being. That's one side. Then we read, like I just quoted from this question, that the Yetzer, that there's the other side, the Yetzer's Hara. That expression, the exact translation would be, man's heart is evil from his stirrings, from his youngest age. This, by the way, is the source for the concept of Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Leva Adam, Ra Min Urav. And then there's the Yetzer Taiv, which we read about in Bereshis. But which one's read first? Bereshis. You don't hear Ram Ne'urav till later, even though we see from Adam and Eve's behavior that they're capable of doing something wrong. But expression, defining a human being's Yetzer Leva Adam, Ram Ne'urav, comes later. So you have here a tremendous seemingly duality, where you have on one hand a person's inclination toward the divine transcendence and doing what we are charged to do in fulfilling God's mission in this world. And then we have the capacity where we lose and we wander off, and Nayeka, we're asked, where are you? Due to the Yetzer Leva Adam Ram Ne'urav. The Mabul represented the worst of possible scenarios where human beings fell to the worst, Malei Aretz Shachas, that the world was filled with crime and corruption. The Mabul had two purposes. It was both a cleanser, like a mikveh, and also a Tara, that's why it's called like Tara. and it was also destroying the evil that existed. But it was never meant to destroy the universe altogether. The best proof is Noach and his family were preserved. So when we talk about God's change of mind, the way we have to think of it is not change of mind. These are two perspectives on looking at the universe. And we discussed, I believe, last week in the Chassidus Question, is God happy with this world? He created this world. Created Nisava Kodesh Baruch Liyus Dira B'Tachteinim. He had desire to have a Dira B'Tachteinim. Tachteinim by definition means it's not going to be simple. As the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 36 in Tanya, Tachteinim in what? In Gili Ein Sof, that the Tachteinim, the lowest, because it's completely concealed till the world is Moli Klippas V'Sitra Achre, filled with Klippas, with husks and negative energies, that Cheshach Kafle Mechupel, till the point that they're menagid, they go against and defy God. To the point that they yell out, Aniva Av Sied, I and nothing else, in complete defiance to godliness. That's what God wanted. He wanted a world where that hostility, that darkness was there, for us to be wise enough and to transform it, like I said before, to bring light, to make it illuminate and warm that world. So therefore, when you think of it, it's complex. It's not like you just say, God always has nachs. It depends how we behave. And that's why the Torah spells it out, not just telling us, why do we need to know what God was thinking in creation, and then later regrets it, and then later says, I will not destroy again. We're being told that we have a relationship with God, and we have a constant relationship, and our relationship can go in two directions. One can be a direction where God creates the world with that type of Vayar Elikim, and he sees that the world is a good world, Tev, Vayar Elikim, and that Tev, Ki Tev, and Chuchpol Beki Tev, that it's good. The world that he's created is good. And when a human being behaves appropriately, then he brings out the goodness even more and turns it into a garden, as the Rebbe explains in the psyche of Yud Shvat Tov Shalom at Beis Bosid Legani, Legnuni, the Mokum Shoy Ikar B'Tchila Ikar Shchina B'Tachteinim Mesa. It's a good world. And fundamentally, it's not a jungle. It's a good world, a world that has divinity in its spirituality concealed. The human beings created in the divine image. But then there's another side. There's the Tachteinim part, the concealment. And the concealment, when misunderstood, or so to speak, people don't live up to its true purpose, which is to overcome the concealment and bring light into it, like the famous example that the father or the parent hides from the child. And instead of understanding this is meant to bring out the ingenuity of the child, to find the father, people start saying, you know what, it's a dark world, and they give up, God forbid, and get resigned. Then you have the other side, where we succumb to the Yetzer Lev Adam Ramanurav. And then you have God's relationship with that type of human being and that type of human condition is the opposite, where he says those words that God says, I will wash away man whom I created from upon the face of the earth. The best proof is, like I said, he's not washing away man because he saved Noach. But the majority of man, and that potential negative and corruption, that needs to be cleansed. But then the purpose comes back again, that Noach, and after the flood, Hashem sees that now it's been cleansed, so now you get back to the message, I will never do this again. So the question is, why did he do it first? Because the Mabul, in a way, had to be the first cleanser. It's like in the early childhood of a child, when things get really bad because the child has been spoiled, which is the case before the Mabul. People lived long, they had gifts. In general, we say this about the first 26 generations before Matan Torah. And what happens when a person is spoiled? They can mess up. So you need a one-time type of lesson that's like a market correction, similar to what we talk in Kabbalah and Chassidus about Shviras HaKelim. Shviras HaKelim is a market correction, a type of immune system that corrects itself and then sets the tone, and afterwards human beings no longer lived long lives. 120 years became the capacity, as we learn in Pasha Noach. And now comes the work that is hard work. You're not going to get the same gifts as the first 10 generations, but now it's going to come through your effort. And God Taka says, now I will not destroy it again. Now I will give you the power to grow. And of course, the simon that he makes, the keshas, that in Leish Besu, that I will not disturb and not suspend the laws of nature and destroy again. But these are not. It's not an exchange of mind. It's two attitudes, and that's something that we need to understand in this relationship. Okay. And of course, what we can learn from this is that in our situation as well, when you're dealing, let's say, with your own children, or you're dealing with people that you are responsible for, you're an educator, or friends, and so on, They may do things that are beautiful and that enhance your relationship, but then there are times they may do something that's not appropriate. You have to realize that, yes, there are times that you need to have a more disciplined attitude, more gvura than chesed, but the point of the gvura is not changing the chesed, it's just necessary at that time. And then you get to a point where after you discipline your child, you really want the child is to thrive and grow in a loving way. So even while you were disciplining, you also know that the purpose of it was not, God forbid, discipline for the name of discipline. Discipline in order to correct, or like when you weed a garden, or you clean up anything, you're cleaning it up in order to be more beautiful. Sometimes in this world, you beautify something, and sometimes you need to clean it. Sometimes you need to plant the flowers, but you also have to need to weed the weeds and uproot the weeds. And both Aseh Tev and Asur Merah are both two different approaches, and they're both part of it. That's why we have mitzvahs sesa, mitzvahs leisesa. Both come from Hashem. But one is focusing on the positive, what you should bring light into the world, and the other is telling us what to stay away from and not allow ourselves to get into the corrupt or into inappropriate type of behavior that disturbs the balance and conceals the garden and the beauty that the world really is about. Moshiach comes through our Masenu Avidasenu, will reveal obviously the positive, and the negative will be completely erased. So we also have in our personal lives, excuse me, in our personal lives we have these two approaches and these two attitudes, and essentially it's like the Chasdei Hashem and Gvuras Hashem, but both are necessary. So when we talk about right in the beginning of creation, it says that the Eibishter wanted all of Machshava to create the world b'midas hadin, but he saw the world cannot be miskayim. What the midas hadin, Chassidus says, the tzimtzum, to conceal. So he added midas harachim, compassion. So what is the meaning behind that? Because Gevura on its own also has a very positive side. It's discipline, it's channeling. However, in a world where you don't have a perfect world, sometimes Gevura could also be destructive. It could be too intense. So you need the midas harachim to balance it. Lasad Lavi, it'll say Yitzchak Avinu, because Lasad Lavi, Moshiach comes, the Gevura, the positive elements of discipline will be revealed as channelers and as harnessers of Chesed. So you have Chesed, Gevura, Teferes. Chesed is when God's bestowing His blessings. Gevura is the disciplines necessary, and compassion keeps the balance, that everything is in place. Okay. Next question. Why is it not good enough to be a good Jew at heart? Why is it not enough to be a good Jew at heart? In 60 Days is the book that I composed and authored, which just came to conclusion after 60 days from Elul and Tishrei, a type of workbook each day. Some of you may be familiar with it. So here's a question referring to the day 59. In 60 days, day 59, you write, some people say that they don't have to keep the Torah and its commandments because it's good enough to be a Jew at heart. They say they love God, they meditate on the oneness of the universe a lot, and they are basically good people. The rituals and mandates of Judaism they don't need. It is true that in most spiritual disciplines other than Judaism, the action is not as important as what is going on beneath the surface. But Judaism says that what is beneath the surface does not truly change unless there's an action above the surface. It's like a contract that is never signed and executed. Imagine, for example, that you give a brilliant business presentation and your customer heartily responds, "What a wonderful project. I'm in. I'm with you 100%." But he doesn't sign the contract. If he doesn't invest in your project, what do his words ultimately matter? It's nice that he gave you his emotional support. What you want and need is his active support. The material world is about bottom lines. It is driven by action and can only be transformed by action. Not just any action, but action which spiritualizes the material. This is why it is not enough to be a Jew at heart. End of quote in 60 days. So this individual writes, I disagree with your presentation. There are so many rote Jews I know who just go through the motions, and many Reform Jews who belong to shuls with dynamic programs within their community. There is more than one way to be a good Jew. Let's not make less observant Jews lesser people. Plus, let's realize that not everything is known about Abraham, respectfully. So, I don't see how you derive from my words here that we're being less respectful. If anyone familiar with what I've say all the time, which is based on the teachings of Chassidus and Torah, is that every person is equal in the eyes of God. And this is not about a judgment. This is a matter of that no one is lesser despite their level of observance. Everyone is created in the divine image. Everyone has a neshama. In addition, I speak at length about the trappings of mechanical and by road Judaism. So I'm not sure where you got this conclusion. And I'm saying this very directly. So the point of this piece is that whoever you are and whatever level of observance, action is paramount. Hamaiso ikir. And that's the bottom line, not just feelings. Everybody on their level. And this is not about a judgment and so on. It's basically stating that in this world, just saying, I'm a good Jew at heart, that I'm with you in my heart, but you don't act on it, is not correct, is not complete. And this example, we see it, nobody would accept that when it comes to real commitments in anything in life. So that's my general response. In addition, I want to read something that somebody wrote when they saw, I guess, that I was going to discuss this. So they write from Rabbi Joshua Gordon, Olav Shalom, the Shliach of the Valley that passed away recently, sadly, Rabbi Joshua Gordon, Olav Shalom, told how his father finally understood why there was so much heart disease in his congregation. He relates that when he was growing up, was a Jew with his hands, with his feet, with his mind, and with every part of his being and every part of his body. But now he finds so many people coming to his synagogue telling him, "It's okay, Rabbi, I'm a Jew in my heart." The burden is too much for one heart to bear. It has to be shared with the rest of the body. At that point, he understood why there's such a prevalence of heart disease nowadays. Now, I don't know if this is half humorous, and it's very important not to make jokes about such matters, but there is a certain truth to it, that when a person says everything is in the heart and doesn't spread to the rest of the body, you don't see that person committed in any way with their arms and legs, and they don't show up when you need them, and so on. Yes, it puts undue pressure. So I guess the context of this is that to just demonstrate that you cannot put all the pressure on the heart. Now, of course, I want to qualify and say again, anyone that has heart issues, obviously that's not a result of this type of behavior, and they should have a refuah shlema and should only be healthy hearts, and so on. But at the same time, there is, of course, that famous, joke where a guy was getting a heart transplant, and they asked him whose heart he wants to replace. So he said the heart of the miser that was about to pass away. Why? Because he says it was never used, and he wants a new heart. So, of course, that's a joke. But the point is, a used heart, of course, is one that is a better heart. In this case, we're talking not just being a good person at heart, but also in action. So I read this. I hope I qualified it properly and didn't come across as anything inappropriate. So that's the bottom line, and it's actually a beautiful concept that there's a holistic element that where we need our minds, we need our emotions, but we need our actions. The three pillars that upon which the world stands, and including the personal, a microcosm of the world, is Torah, the mind, the study of God's wisdom, Aveda, which is Tefillah or Kabbanis, which is the service of the heart, Aveda Shebelev, but then Gemilas Chasadim, actions. Actually giving tzedakah. Someone will say, my heart's with you, but they don't ever help somebody, is not the bottom line. It's missing the bottom line is missing. As the Rebbe once said to Arik Sharon, who asked the Rebbe, why you have a mitzvah tefillin campaign, why not teach people Torah or teach them about different mitzvahs? So the Rebbe said, I'm surprised that you're asking such a question. You trained the military. He was the head of general in the army, in the IDF in Sahel. He says, why don't you just sit and teach your military to read military books and study them and study all the science about war and so on, and not have any exercises? He says, Rebbe, you can't have that because you need to know how to fight the war. It's not just enough in the books. The Rebbe said exactly what tefillin. You need the action because you need to fight the war and bring it into action, not just what it says in books or in the heart. Next question. Loneliness. I feel so lonely, what can I do about it? Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I have a feeling that my feelings of loneliness are rooted in always seeking another's attention, or from a less selfish point of view, it comes from me wanting to feel needed by others. But still, I was hoping you could shed some light on how to cure loneliness. Just to describe the feeling a little bit, I would say that I have about 3 friends and that I feel close with and not lonely around them. But everyone else I'm around or any environment I end up in, at times I feel very lonely. Like a stranger to everyone, out of place. It's not so describable, it's more of a sadness. Always missing those that I'm close with. This feeling comes and goes. At times I can feel very upbeat and want to converse with everyone at shul after shachas, and at times I feel so isolated and disliked. I just got married about 3 months ago. If anything the loneliness increased. I miss the bochim I would hang out with all the time within yeshiva. I miss my parents, my siblings. Baruch Hashem, I still keep in touch with everyone, but it's not the same. Okay, so let me break this down to a few components. Loneliness in general, and now that you say you just got married, is a specific focus on that. This is a topic I've discussed a number of times, and it's part of the issue in general. There's existential loneliness that we all have. But loneliness, as you accurately describe, is often very much part of somebody who may be insecure, always feeling needy somebody else, and they're very afraid to be alone. Some people are very healthy and secure, have good friends, but they also know how to be alone in a healthy way, and know how to focus, and know how to introspect, be introspective, and deal with their own internal challenges or issues, and so on. Like Hillel says, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? So there's an element of being with the self. And if I'm only for myself, what am I? So sometimes loneliness is missing the balance where you're over-dependent on others for the things you have to work through yourself. And that sometimes causes the opposite, that you feel constantly lonely because you don't have others that can really fill that void. So for this, we all need to have Chassidim mishpacha, chaverim. We need to have friends. We need to have mentors. We need to have people we can speak to. Let's start with one. You have 3 people that are friends, very nice. You need to have someone you can speak to, because I don't know all the circumstances that is defining why you're in this way, and it's very hard to be generic about this. But the fact is that we were given the power to be friends to each other. We can be comrades, kindred spirits, and we can find people that have certain commonality with us. They don't have to be us. We don't have to be over-dependent on them and not under-dependent. It has to be that proper balance that I just mentioned. As far as marriage goes, I would say it sounds to me a little sad that you just got married and you feel lonelier than ever. I think you need to, before getting worse, I think you need to sit down, maybe with your wife or without, and sit down and discuss what's going on here. Why should your wife not be your best friend? Why should she not be able to be someone you can speak to and feel companionship? Why do you feel isolated and lonely with a spouse? The whole point, the man cannot be alone, meaning it's the exact opposite of loneliness is what marriage is supposed to be. Now, it's not enough. We have to have friends, and we have community, and we have family, and so on. It's not replacing that. But I think you have to really look at that, and I'm not sure what the reasons are. Again, you don't write enough for me to be able to comment. But I definitely encourage you to go look and discuss this with someone that could help out the situation. Now, it could very well be that you have to develop in your own inner sense of confidence and self to be able to reach out and speak a little more vulnerably with your spouse, which may be the heart of the issue. I can't speculate and know if that's the case, but that may be one of the reasons. Generally speaking, the bottom line, the battle against loneliness is to realize that, number one, Hashem is always with you and you have a purpose to fulfill and it comes from within. Number two, that you have enough value to be able to find good friends and reach out. Do not be complacent about loneliness. Do not allow yourself to wallow in this isolated state and say, that's who I am. You have to fight it, and you have to find ways to reach to people, the people that you're friendly with, let them help you with that, and not allow this to become, because it could end up haunting and becoming a monster bigger than one may know, because loneliness creates a breeding ground for other issues. So those are brief statements regarding that. Let us go to the next question. We're going to talk about how low has our generation fallen. To His Excellency Rabbi Jacobson. These titles are very amusing to me, but I'm reading them because I guess I'm not going to censor that. But I find them interesting. Thank you so much for your weekly MyLife Chassidus Applied episodes. They are insightful and give many people, myself included, inspiration for the week. In light of Hurricane Harvey Weinstein, and all the claims of abuse from him and others, I am once again reminded of a quote from Bereshis Rabbah from the end of Pasha Bereshis. So I'm going to just translate. Zabhuna b'shem Rabbi Omer, that the world, the Der HaMabel, the generation of the flood, were not erased from this world until they behaved in ways that were sexually inappropriate. And Rabbi Omer Absamaloi, he says, wherever you find znus, which is inappropriate sexual behavior, and the message you have destruction comes to the world and kills the good and the bad. Rabbi Zayin Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Simon b'shem Rabbi Yehuda ben Levi Amar ala kol HaKadosh Baruch Hu Meirech Afbei chutz min aznus. God is patient with everything except sexual inappropriate behavior. In our generation in the USA and the world, homosexuality is condoned, sexuality is paraded in the most vulgar of ways, genders are confused, and promiscuity and abuse is rampant. Men can use women's bathrooms, the list goes on. While I know what Hashem has promised to never flood the world again, what steps would we, as the Frum and including Chabad community, take to ensure that when divine retribution strikes, we're nowhere near it? Should we be moving out of this country, say, to Israel? Ooh, 1 second here. This jump is a little jolting, so let me just start with this. Yes, sexual inappropriate behavior, it lies at the heart of most corruption and is the breakdown of families, breakdown of marriage, and often the breakdown of everything else that society stands for. That's why the Medrash is so strong about it, and that's why the Mabul was connected to that. But let's make something very clear. The Rebbe said exactly, he will not bring another Mabul. So when we see these things happening, this is not a question of where you're going to find refuge. Unfortunately, and I don't like to say anything negative, go to Israel. Israel also has its issues regarding these matters. There's nowhere in the world you're going to find a pure sexual environment. That's the reality. So the question is, how are we supposed to look at this? That's how I would pose the question, not whether we're supposed to run for cover. Number one is, it taka reveals the vulnerability around this issue, ein apatrufus la'arayis, that nobody is immune. And everybody has to be very careful in this regard, especially in a world like ours that's so open. You have a mobile phone and everything is accessible. So number one, heightened sensitivity to the modesty necessary and to the hilchos yichud, all the guidelines and the guards and the gates that the Torah applies, that a person should make sure to protect themselves from such things, and no one should ever think they're beyond capacity to fall. Number two, as the Rebbe says in the famous psyche in Purim Tavshem Zayin, where he speaks about, he says, on one hand we speak about so close to the Gula, on the other hand we see things that never happened before, and a promiscuity and other things, and the Rebbe says there, interestingly, he doesn't bemoan it, oh, this is the difficulty and darkness of Golus. He says, this is also from the signs of Gula, because things are becoming clear. You're becoming very clear where society is at. So on one hand, it seems like nicer if you don't hear about it, but on the other hand, to expose it, and once and for all, everyone sees clearly what it leads to, can then begin a discussion. Look what's going on in Hollywood in general. It's not just Mr. Weinstein. Look at Hollywood in general. What's on television? What's in Hollywood? What's in movies? The whole attitude to intimacy, to family structure, to loyalty, to commitment, to sexuality. So it's a climate that is completely corrupt in that sense. Now this doesn't dismiss or take away someone's abuse and someone's in any way type of predator behavior or destructive behavior. Absolutely, everyone's accountable. But let's not make it as like it's one person. It's a climate of permissiveness that has permeated society. So our job is not whether God's going to punish and we have to get out of the way. What do we do to correct the situation? And we have to be a loud and very powerful moral voice, not about criticizing and not about condemning people. Let the others do that. People will do that. We have to find ways to how do we higher the standard that our children are brought into a world, an education, and exposure to a climate, they're brought into a pure world, a world that is permeated with a divine sanctity around marriage, around sexuality, around intimacy, around all these matters. That is the best preemptive measure. Those that are criminals obviously should be prosecuted and do whatever has to be done, shamed or whatever it is to get them where they have to get. But the bigger question is, we are charged with the mission of Tikkun Olam. And the Rebbe told us we're close to the Gula. And this is just revealing a scenario that causes us to have to rise to the occasion and do something about it. That's how I would approach this whole thing. So yes, on one hand, it's ikvus of the Moshiach, the signs of darkness in many ways, but it's also a clarity that helps us understand. So on one hand, it's the best of times because we have such freedoms. We have such opportunities that never existed before. We have so many signs of a world that can be such a beautiful world like I described before. At the same time, we also have being revealed and exposed the bottom of the pot and things that are very inappropriate, with the goal of us using that exposure to do something about it. Of course, it's outside of the scope of this particular discussion what to do, but that's the wake-up call that I see, that all these things should be addressed, as opposed to trying to run, we're going to run. I mean, Yena tried to run away, and what happened? It was because of him, the storms came. So we can't run away. Hashem sent us to this earth not to run away from these challenges, obviously not to be involved in them, but to do whatever we can to correct them. We have to be part of the solution and not part of the problem, and definitely not be just passive bystanders. Okay. Next question. Chabad variations from the mainstream. We've been addressing that over the weeks. We're going to address the third one, the third question of a series. We talked about sleeping in the sukkah. We talked about davening late. And now we'll talk about Shalosh Sudas, the third Suda on Shabbos. Eating Suda Shlishis on Shabbos, the third meal, was the Rebbe's shita to eliminate it entirely or just to discourage eating a proper meal. In the Anash Shul in my community, minimal refreshments are offered for those who wish to partake. Otherwise, shiurim take place between Mincha and Ma'ariv on Shabbos. Yet sometimes the shul will hold a proper sit-down Suda Shlishis, which means the third meal, to celebrate various events. Can you please discuss the Rebbe's shita regarding this topic? Yes. Rebbe's opinion about this topic. Thank you very much, and Gemach Simet Tov. Okay, so there's an entire sikha from the Rebbe that covers this whole topic, and thank you, and thank God allows me to not have to address it in detail. I'll just give a taste of what it says, but look in Likutei Sichos, volume 21, the sikha of Beshalach, which is on page 84 and on. Beautiful sikha, starting with a famous statement that yes, we learn from Parsha Beshalach, we learn about 3 meals, mitzvah 3 meals, and the Alter Rebbe actually says that even though there are opinions that the third meal, there's opinions in Poskim that you cannot eat bread, and there's those that are more lenient to the point of just eating cake or just fruit and so on. The Alter Rebbe nevertheless says, "Ein lismach," you shouldn't rely on that, except if somebody is simply unable to eat, and therefore it's going to cause them pain. And nevertheless, there's the meaning that's brought in Hayem Yem Chav Beis Adar Aleph, which is, by the way, close to I think Beshalach is usually Shvat, so no, it's not Chav Beis Adar Aleph, where it says clearly that about not that the minig is that the Rabbeim did not eat, did not wash for the third meal, and we just yetsu with a ti'ima kolshi, just a taste of something. And he asked the question, how do you reconcile that with the Alter Rebbe? So there he goes on to a lengthy discussion. First of all, that initially you could say the reason that it says in Levush and another poskim, that the reason is because the third meal, we learned the 3 meals from the 3 times it says Hayom, meaning on Shabbos, the eating of the man. So it says 3 times Hayom, but eating man on Shabbos. So from this we learn the 3 meals. But the 3rd time says Hayom loy timtza'u, that today you will not find it. So the loy, they learn from that. That's why that there's a certain remez or simon by not eating, because it's hinted to in the not that you will not find man, the food from heaven on Shabbos. In Chassidus it says, because we have a taste on the 3rd meal, from the Gemara it says that the 3 meals, the 3rd one corresponds to Yaakov ufaras to Geula. It's a taste where it says that Elam Haba will be no achila v'lo shtiyah. So we have a taste of it by minimizing and not having a full meal and just a taste of the meal. But the Rebbe then says it's still not enough, because then he's basically saying that from Pnimius Ateidah you're allowed to make a kula, a leniency. So the Rebbe explains it's not a leniency. Because once a person knows that this is a taste of l'asad love, so he'll have tzad, as the Alter Rebbe says, if he eats. And as such, this is just a brief summary of what he says, and as such, that's why l'chatchila, what's the einig of this person? Shabbos, the main reason that we eat meals on Shabbos, it says in Shulchan Aruch, is not for the eating, it's for the pleasure that comes from it. So if eating a meal does not bring pleasure, and pleasure will come from just a taste, because it gives us a taste of Moshiach and Geula, that's the pleasure. That's why in the 3rd meal we only have a taste. Then of course is the question, why a taste altogether? Then we should not eat at all if it's a taste of l'asad love. So that explains, because the advantage doesn't mean that they will not be eating when Moshiach comes, or in the final tkufa, Elam Haba ein bo yachila v'shtiyah. It means that we will not need food for sustenance, but they will be eating for other reasons. So this is essentially a summary of the sikha. You can look it up yourself. Very, very practical and profound sikha, that on the contrary, the minimizing of the eating of the meal of eating of washing, and just eating a taste of a fruit or something or Mezenis on the Shalosh Sudas is actually a gili of, a taste of what will be when Mashiach comes. Yeah. So you can look up the Sikha again, it's in volume 21, page 84. Okay. Now, let's do some follow-ups. Let's start with the Rebbe Moshiach in episode 183, follow-up. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I would like to start by saying how much I enjoy your program. I feel that you have such an ability to make the complex understood. It was such Hashgacha Pratis that you discussed the topic of the Rebbe being Mashiach last week, because I was very troubled by this very topic the past week or so. I don't understand how you could condone the belief that the Rebbe is Mashiach. Isn't this against the normative accepted tradition of Yiddishkeit? Was the belief that Mashiach can come back from the dead ever considered a mainstream Yiddishkeit? No one ever considered such a thing till now in a real way, so why should we start thinking so now? Even if Mashiach is from the dead, why should it be the Rebbe more than any other candidate? If he was alive, then we would say that he was the Mashiach of the Dar. But after he is dead, there is no longer any reason to declare him as such. I apologize for using these expressions that may offend some. I'm reading as the person wrote it. And more importantly, the Rebbe clearly was distressed as being identified as Mashiach, so how could anyone do so and to say things have changed? So why is such a Baal Gaiva? So who is such a Baal Gaiva who can begin to decide such things? I know this sounds harsh and I don't really expect you to read this publicly, but the topic really disturbs me, and the person gives his private email. If you want to respond at all, thank you very much. Well, my response is that we're talking all within Torah, and the fact of the matter is that there is the ability to interpret it that way. I'm not saying a person has to interpret it that way. Let everyone make their own decision. But there's nothing hepech halacha to say so, because the Gemara does leave such an option. Why the Rebbe? It's not the point of the Rebbe. Someone that believes that the Rebbe began the process believes the Rebbe will finish the process. And when we say the Rebbe, as I've discussed many times, what do we mean by the Rebbe? Neshama of Mashiach, do you mean the guf of the Rebbe? And what age? These are things we don't know. The point of the matter is, someone identifies the Rebbe, the Neshama of the Rebbe, with the Neshama of Mashiach. It's not unheard of. The concept exists, and it's not that controversial, actually, if you understand it, because Mashiach is not just a man of flesh and blood. Obviously he is, from the house of David, but he represents something. And whoever Mashiach is going to be a Neshama of a great soul. And some people who believe and connect to the Rebbe, those that believe, feel that Neshama will be in the Rebbe. And that will be the one that's active in that sense. And I've discussed this again at length, so I don't have to go into detail. Another question, note regarding this, Deir Shvi. In episode 183, a question was raised regarding if we could still be considered the seventh generation, and what that would mean to the Rebbe's prophecy in Parsha Shoftim. I'd just like to point to Bereshis 15:16, where Avram is promised that the fourth generation will return to the land of Israel. Rashi says that this was true because Kolev was the fourth generation after Yaakov. From this we see that if one person remains alive from that generation, we could still consider it as part of that generation. Okay, very good. Now there's more follow-up on this topic, but I want to spread this out a bit more, and I'm going to talk about it more in the coming weeks. I want to go to another discussion, which was regarding sexual challenges. A response to the heartfelt cry of the divorced man struggling with Shazal, episode 184. Hello, Rabbi Jacobson. Thank you for your enlightening and inspiring virtual Farbrengens. They bring light and joy to the entire week. I want to respond to the divorced man whose pre-Rosh Hashanah letter you read on episode 184. His letter was heartful, and I could feel the struggle he is enduring. I too was once a bocher and later a divorced man, and found redirecting to positive things and heschadas not always enough to keep temptation and natural physical urges at bay. Baruch Hashem, I'm remarried for many years, much older, and I no longer struggle as I used to with this issue. One thing that did help me, in addition to the others mentioned above, is a teaching I learned in the Zohar for Parshat Bereshis 19b, that when Adam HaRishon separated from Chava for 130 years and unintentionally wasted seed, the ramifications lasted for thousands of years. Those dysfunctional souls created by Adam were reincarnated many times seeking a rectification. In the generation of the flood, in the generation of the Tower of Babel, later in the Egyptians during Yosef's life, and still later in the Erev Rav. Yaakov Avinu was also a reincarnation of Adam HaRishon, and his 130 years of suffering were a rectification for Adam's 130 years of sin. In other words, when one contemplates the damage caused by the wasted energy, it can be the extra push needed to withstand the temptation. Anyway, I hope this can help the young men out there who need chizuk in this matter. Okay, so thank you for that. I have a few more follow-ups, and if there's other topics I wanted to address, and really, it's unbelievable. Every time I hope that I'm going to address them, time just simply runs out. Well, I guess that's also good news. But I will absolutely address the topics that I've said I would address. And if it's not this week, as I said, it would be the coming weeks. So let us go over right now to the question, the Chassidus question, and then the essays. The Chassidus question is on Tanya Perek Yud Gimel, Tanya chapter 13. And here's the question. Learning this Tanya in chapter 13, I've noticed a seemingly contradictory idea. On the one hand, the Tanya talks about a Beinoni as someone who never sinned. But when he talks about someone who sins, he always says the words Nikra Rasha Ba'isa Shah, which means he's called a Rasha in that moment, in that time. Why is that? This is not the commonly asked question about the contradiction between the above interpretation of Beinoni and what the Alter Rebbe says about Avedus HaBeinoni being relevant for everyone. And I think you've discussed that in the past. I'll explain that in a moment. This is something about the Alter Rebbe seemingly hesitating to call someone who has sinned in the past a Rasha. Rather he remains with saying, Nikra Rasha be'esa shah. He's called a Rasha in that time. Maybe the two questions contradiction answer each other, but I don't know. Okay, a very interesting question. And I haven't really seen it discussed in this context, but let's address it. So yes, in Perek Yud Gimel, the Alter Rebbe says, when he talks about why Zev is Sheftan, what's the Lashon Zev is Sheftan, the Neitzu Tev and Yitzhar, Sheftan, not Meishlam, they don't control, they don't rule, they're like judges, objective judges that give their opinion. So he says, because each one gives their opinion, and he says, I'm just looking for the Lashon. Yeah. Kishiyesh Eza Shlita Memshala, when there's any type of control for the Yetzer Hara in the Iktan, in the small city which is the body, even for a short hour, Shal Kal, even for a moment, is called the Nikra Rasha Be'esa Shah. And we can't say that because a Beinoni is not a Rasha. So the person is asking, what is the Be'esa Shah? Why is he Be'esa Shah? He's called a Rasha. Rasha V'Tevle is a definition of a person who has the capacity in Machshava Dibra and Maisa, whose Machshava Dibra and Maisa are not always pure. A Beinoni is someone that never had even a negative thought and has never sinned, not thought, speech, or action at all. So he's referring to another question that's asked, which is, how could we say that when we say Midas Habein and Midas Kol Adam, Perek Yudal, chapter 14, everyone is Midas Kol Adam. How could anyone be a Beinoni? Once you did one sin, you're already not a Beinoni. So the Rebbe answers on that you're Be'esa Shah, meaning that the Be'esa Shah, different meaning in Be'esa Shah, which means that when a person is in that state, that they are behaving like a Beinoni, it's as if there was no other state. In that situation, they're completely like a Beinoni. And that's why everyone has the capacity to reach a level like that. So when a person does not make that effort, so they're in the static category of a Rasha V'Tevle. But he's asking the question the other way around. Why does the Alter Rebbe not just call the person a Rasha? Now if you look in Perek Yud Aleph, you have a similar expression. In Perek Yud Aleph, there's also, it says there, the language is Nikra Rasha Be'esahi. That you call the Rasha at that moment, in chapter 11, where he talks about a Rasha. And that goes back to a reference back to chapter 1 in Tanya. In chapter 1 in Tanya, the language is, he also says a similar expression. He says, let me just give you the exact Lashon. In chapter 1 in Tanya, he says like this. That B'shas he's doing the Aveda, he's called a Rasha. I want to give the exact lashon, so give me a moment. B'shosh eis avenis nikra Rosh Gomer. B'shas is doing an aved, he's called a Rosh Gomer. So the Rebbe in his Haris, in his notes on Tanya, which were printed recently, explains that there's two elements. You look in chapter Aleph, chapter 1 in Tanya, he says tzaddik. When it comes to a tzaddik, you see there's a shem ha-mushal, shem ha-toyer. Tzaddik, you can call somebody who's doing good deeds. His good deeds makes him a tzaddik, but that's only a shem ha-mushal. If you want to categorize someone as a tzaddik, it's only someone that has killed their Yetzer Hara. So similarly, the Rebbe says that the same idea you could say about a Rasha. Rasha be'esaihi or Rasha nikra Rasha be'esah shah, that moment means that we're talking technically, he's called a Rasha. But we're not talking about the category of a Rasha v'tevle, which doesn't mean he's sinning all the time. It means his category is because since he's sinned at least once in Machshava, he's considered in that category of Rasha v'tevle. So we're not talking about the Shem HaTeir, we're talking about the Rasha because of Duta Averis. That's how the Rebbe explains it. But if you take it a step further, I think you could perhaps connect it to the other idea about the Beinani. Because by the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe emphasizing by Esha Shah, he's almost like saying that, even though the Rebbe does not allude to this, but he's almost like saying, the Alter Rebbe, that you're really not a Rasha. You're a Rasha while you're doing that. Either is the category of being a Rasha, yes, is the category of Rasha v'tevli, you're not yet the category of a Beinani. But midas kol adam, the midah of every person is to be a Beinani. And any moment you could become a Beinani. You're called a Rasha, that's why he says, by Esha Shah, because really, like the Rambam says in the end of Perek Beis, in the end of chapter 2 in Hilchos Gedushin, that Yitzrei Hu she'anse, it's Yetzer, his Yetzer is the one that forces him. That's why when you force him to give a get, it's not compelling him. Why? Because really every Jew wants to do Torah mitzvahs. This means even a Rasha v'tevle. And the fact that he's doing for a moment something the opposite is Ba'isha Shah, he has wandered in the wrong place. So you talk about Shem HaToyer as a category, you still call him a Rasha v'tevle. But there's an element that you could also say that's not really who he is, because he has a Nefesh Elokis. And if he works hard, he can actually become the Beinani, which is the midah of Kol Adam, because that's his true midah. So Rosh V'Tevle is by default, like we spoke before, Yetzer Lev Adam Ram and Urav. By default, that's who we are. But you could reach a Beinani, and when you reach a Beinani, it's like Ki'ilu Le'ovrav Aveda. That moment, you're like as if you never did anything else. Why? Because Be'etzem, that's who you really are. So I believe you could use that as an explanation. I have not seen it. On the contrary, from the Rebbe, it appears that the explanation is the Shem HaTeir and Shem HaMushal thing, like I said before. But perhaps you could take it a step further and reconcile it with that idea of Babeni and Russia and so on. So thank you for that question. It's a very fundamental issue. And we will now go over to the essays. So 3 essays as we've always been doing. This is from this year's 2017 essay contest. The first one is Why You Should Be a Giver by Gitis Dovidavitz. It's an Hebrew one, Gitis Dovidavitz, age 42, a shlicha, who works also in writing and an editor. Petach Tikva Israel. She writes basically very, I guess, a little disarming type of essay, but really begins immediately. She says, one of the things I came to discover, one of the amazing things I came to discover recently, or over the years, the fact that you're able to give even when you are not, even when you're missing something. Giving is not just when you have much in abundance, but even when you're missing, you also give. Meaning, even when you're deficient, you give. And it's a very beautiful essay in that sense, the power of giving, no matter what, with a few interesting case studies and describing the power of giving. Taking from the Rebbe the lesson from the vacuum of the needle, that the vacuum draws out. That means sometimes when you're lacking, you could give even more than when you have. And that power that allows you to actually receive more and actually break through boundaries when you give exactly when you think you can give. I found that to be a very interesting essay. So that's essay 1. Sharei Nisina, it's called, The Gates of Giving. Essay number 2 is Why So Serious by Moshe Rosner. He's a CEO at Palm Capital, Vaughan, Canada, age 26. We've all experienced or heard of the Monday blues. It talks about basically the blues, which means the monotony and the boredom of life and the micro-depression that it brings. The repetition of life and how it wears us down. And discusses how we face that challenge by growing due to pressure, using the analogy of the lobster that grows consistently and then it sheds its shell because of its growth. So essentially saying that Jewish mysticism says that a person cannot sin unless a spirit of folly befalls him. And the more he sins, the more he's desensitized to the sins he commits. So this teaches us that all humankind is genuinely good, and only sins if external forces overcome the person. 2, since something external is attempting to confuse the person and in a pressurized situation, he can honestly be judged and show his true willpower and choice. And 3, there must be a way to prevent the spirit from overcoming the person, meaning the spirit of folly, and persuading him to do evil. And he goes into a discussion of shtus and shtus de gedusha as being an antidote to the boredom of life. Holy foolishness is the way to fight mechanical Judaism, because it transcends all forms of limitations. That's the essential gist of it. And this essay and all the essays can be seen, the new essays, as we post them on meaningfullife.com/mylife, and look at the essays of 2017. Also, if you subscribe at meaningfullife.com to our weekly newsletter, we also will notify you of all the new updates and postings of these essays and other postings. The third essay is Alien Thoughts and Temptations by Moshe Raichik, age 16, a student at Yeshiva Boys School of Pittsburgh, Gaithersburg, Maryland. Basically deals with machshavas, alien thoughts and thoughts that come from the evil side of a person and how to deal with it. And brings a nice selection from different places in Chassidus, including Tanya, Perek of Zayin, chapter 27, chapter 26, the second part of the introduction to Tzavos HaRevosh from the Baal Shem Tov, section 13, 14 of Tzavos HaRevosh of the Baal Shem Tov, the previous Friedrich Rebbe in a letter, bringing all kinds of different sources of dealing how you fight temptations. So a nice collection of the different ways to do so. You could read that in the essay. Well done. And with that, we conclude the essays and this episode 185. Everyone should have a good Gebench to Yod. And again, the place to write all your comments, questions, and so on is meaningfullife.com/mylife. Again, Refuah Shlema Yeshua to fall Halevi ben Yecheved, complete and speedy recovery. All children, all Jews everywhere, all people everywhere should be healthy and should have a good, blessed year in all abundance, in all possible ways. And it should be finally the year of Geula Hamitis V'Hashlema. Until next Sunday, every Sunday 8 to 9 p.m., we are on and broadcast live at MyLife, Chassidus Applied. Thank you very much, and everyone have a blessed week.